of moms. This is going to feel like I'm speaking very personally, and I am, because it really is what my personal story is what led to what became my life's work. And I find that sharing really openly, as you've probably found too, opens doors that might have been shut, be having closed minds to the topic of drug use and addiction. But in sharing my story, I can move people along with me. So I'm going to share this presentation as I would a group that may not know anything about addictive illness, and kind of take them from the beginning. So I never dreamed that I'd be speaking about this topic when I was growing up in Escondido on an avocado ranch. And in my life, I've had many roles. I was a dancer for many years, taught dance. I was a model. I taught infants to swim. I was a fashion show producer. I am still a fashion show producer, as Laszlo said, and a fashion editor. And this was my training and experience. But the most important role of my life was that of a mother, and this is how I came to be speaking out against the war on drugs and being an activist for therapeutic and humane drug policies. I loved being a mother, and it's kind of fun for me to be seeing these pictures. I had my baby's natural childbirth, which is an irony. I wanted to give them a drug-free best start. They did a lot to change that around as the years went by. I didn't want to miss the miracle either, and I loved nursing. I nursed both of my sons for 2 years. I found it a time of pure give and take, simple supply and demand. I loved being a mother to young boys who were full of life and mischief, and I can still conjure up the smell of dirty socks, the sound of laughter at bathroom humor, and wet kisses from an exuberantly affectionate 8-year-old. My 2 sons were bright and beautiful. One had big brown eyes, brunette curls, and a thoughtful nature, and the other was a sunny, freckle-faced blonde with a carefree attitude. My greatest hope was that they become happy, healthy adults. But sadly, their happiness was compromised and their health affected by the disease of addiction, substance use disorder. Now in their 40s, they're both recovering from heroin addiction, but they will grapple with the challenges of this chronic illness throughout their lives, and I do understand that. As a parent advocate, I think it's important to speak out, to put a human face on this issue in order to help reduce the stigma of addiction. And I'm really grateful and proud that my 2 sons had the courage to give me permission to talk about their lives so that others could benefit. There really is an issue here of when is it your story and when is it their story, and I think you have to get the permission when you're telling their story or your joint story. My sons were raised in an intact home in a nice neighborhood. Our lives were filled with soccer, music lessons, little league, love, and attention. But unfortunately, they both began using drugs and alcohol in their early teens, which started them down their 2 separate paths that eventually led to heroin addiction, arrest, and incarceration. My firstborn son, Elon, was smart and loving, but in the 8th grade we noticed a real change in him, and he developed that sort of curled lip of defiance. We took him to a counselor who minimized it as normal teen behavior, but the problem progressed. He was a bright student, but he was kicked out of high school for marijuana. He had marijuana in his locker. And we watched him bit by bit give up everything he loved, surfing, tennis, the dream of being a sports announcer, all for his new love, drugs. He was sent to treatment programs, but he was never ready or able to accept the reality of his problem. So he was arrested at 20 years old for marijuana possession, and he ended up spending several terms in prison because of nonviolent offenses relating to his drug problem and relapses and technical violations. That's the way it works. Get a short jail sentence, come out, test dirty, go back in. This time it's prison. He became part of the revolving door of the criminal justice system for 11 years. Instead of receiving treatment and learning recovery, he learned the skills of how to survive in prison. This picture on the right is when he was 24 years old, and that's his jail picture. Other people have pictures of graduation. I had a picture of jail. Survival in prison requires a hardening of the heart, a code of silence. He learned to walk the walk and talk the prison talk, and drugs were easily accessible. In fact, he first learned to use a needle to inject heroin behind bars. I visited state prison week after week and helplessly watched as he assimilated into the prison culture while getting deeper and deeper into his addiction and further away from recovery. So, after months of being warehoused, human storage is what my son calls it, he's released back into society with a growing drug problem, no job skills, little self-esteem, and now an angry ex-con. So, what do you think his chances were of returning? And he is not an isolated case. He represents so many young people who had their lives interrupted in this way. This is an insidious, life-threatening disorder. I've watched him nearly die of an overdose only to go right back onto the streets to use again. And I've seen him come out of prison further damaged and further away from the recovery he needs, with little hope of any positive outcome. Prison exacerbates the problem. We didn't really see the problem with my younger son when he was young, probably because we were so involved in the problems of my firstborn son. I called him my sunshine. He was active on the water polo team, a champion high diver, performed in singing troupe and rock band. He got into a share of trouble, but he graduated from high school and went on to earn a degree in sound engineering, all while using. So the damage was more gradual and less dramatic at the time, but it took him many, many years of losing jobs, his marriage, relationships, his health, before he was able to find recovery. He's been through, we were trying to count it the other day, about 18, 19 programs over these years, some of them court supervised. And I don't regret any of the money I spent on treatment, although I have opinions about what's compassionate and science-based. And although it was a major hardship, at least I could find ways to afford treatment. So many can't. I firmly believe that each engagement in recovery added a piece to the puzzle and at least gave him a chance to clear his body and brain. As a mother, I was willing to do anything to save my son's life. I was a good girl. I listened to the advice of doctors, therapists, judges, anyone. But we know too little about addiction now, and then even less. We've been handling the problem of addiction as a criminal justice issue, bad people doing bad things instead of a public health care concern. And that's added to the stigma. We know that just saying no doesn't work. And I know now that my sons continued using because they never saw a way out. They couldn't imagine life without their drugs at that point. They felt that they needed it to survive, like the air we breathe. And they felt powerless to find a way out of the maze. But I needed to find a way to change powerlessness to empowerment. So I attended Al-Anon meetings, and I grew to love the Serenity Prayer. You know, it helps me to accept the things that I cannot change. I can't change the fact of my son's addictive illness. But it was that second part, the courage to change the things that can and should be changed about the way our society perceives the disorder and the way our society handles it, that got me started and propelled me into motion. So in spring of 1999, 3 parents created a new path. I felt that it should be parents. It should be there should be a male part to this. I asked at an Al-Anon meeting if anybody wanted to talk about what we can do to change things, and Sylvia and Tom showed up, and we got started. We wanted to change policies and laws in regards to nonviolent drug offenders. We all had children whose lives were actively being devastated by the disease of addiction, but were further damaged by the society and criminal justice system that misunderstood and therefore mishandled the problem. We had a vision of therapeutic justice, so we began a path to save lives, heal families, and create healthier communities. Our mission, as you see, is to reduce the stigma associated with addictive illness through education and compassionate support, and to advocate for therapeutic rather than punitive drug policies. So we began to create projects, speak to anybody that would listen to us, write op-eds, and introduce campaigns all directed at reducing the stigma so we could change the playing field so that we could make change. We advocated for treatment instead of incarceration for nonviolent drug offenders, treatment behind bars, and reentry services for successful reintegration into society. You didn't have to read all through that, but that's the gist of that. And we continue to do so. In 2000, it's kind of like watch what you wish, watch out for what you wish for. A little success can get you hooked for life. I became the state chair of Proposition 36, and Laszlo referred to it in the introduction. It passed in California by 61% of the state voters, mandating treatment in lieu of incarceration for nonviolent drug offenders. What was magical about this was that it created a sea change of drug policy reform across the nation. And it indicated that people were ahead of the politicians, certainly in drug policy. And it created a greater overall understanding that addiction is a health care concern and not a criminal justice issue. So many other laws have started changing based on that first major change in drug laws. So our second part was treatment behind bars, and in order to address that issue, we started a self-reflection garden at Donovan State Prison. There was no treatment, or 200 beds, something like that, at Donovan State Prison. Prisons are overcrowded, as you know, particularly in California. 80% of inmates are there for drug and alcohol-related issues, and yet there's no treatment. So instead of offering rehabilitation and treatment, we're warehousing a generation of young people behind gray, concrete, barbed wire environments. These are our sons and daughters, husbands, fathers, brothers that are exposed to anger, gang violence, active drug trade, and rape. And they need treatment to get out of the revolving door of the penal system. We did this not only to try to, as a first step, to try to get treatment, and it was wonderful because the inmates got actively involved in the ownership of this project. But it was also to create awareness on the outside of what's actually going on in prison. So many people say, oh, just let them hit bottom, prison's going to be good for them. So it was a way of getting the media to understand and to basically, more importantly, understand that there's good people behind bars who really deserve to recover. So A New Path is now 17 years old, and we've created a lot of programs, campaigns that address stigma and prejudice and discrimination. We employ a social marketing campaign based on education as to the true nature of addictive disorders. We advocate for therapeutic and restorative policies, and we collaborate with partners for needed change. And I'll talk more about the collaboration aspect in a minute. We're really proud of the innovative projects and policy reforms that we've established. And I'm showing you here on the screen, the Takes Community was the first one, sort of bringing it into the realm addiction of other health issues. It had been a health issue that was in the closet, and it's brought it out in a very public way. Our annual Strut for Sobriety in September, National Alcohol and Drug Recovery Month. We've conducted Inch from the Heart art exhibits, interviewing people who have addictive illness or who got involved in criminal justice with the school system to create greater awareness. Our musical gifts to recovery, our 101 seminars, and our Faces of Recovery calendars, newsletters, parent survival kits. I point this out because what I have learned being a fashion show producer is that people learn and hear and experience in different ways. And so if we can we can get a visceral response. You can talk about things all day long and people won't hear you, but if you can get them to feel or hear or smell or whatever, engage all their senses, then sometimes your message comes through. But I want to concentrate for a minute on stigma, prejudice, discrimination. I got some real bad advice over the years because stigma runs so deep. I was made to feel that somehow it was my fault, that it was an issue of poor parenting, and I think that's why so many parents weren't speaking out. What's particularly harmful is that parents that are navigating these treacherous waters are also being shamed and blamed. They have to deal with anger along with sadness and frustration of watching the lives of their loved ones destroyed and their futures diminished. What other disorder brings about this kind of anger from society? People aren't angry at people with other chronic relapsing disorders. If a diabetic eats cake against the doctor's advice, do we say throw them in jail? And so we fear that which we don't understand. Words matter. We have to be really careful of labels that add to the stigma. And I've learned so much along these 17 years about that. The word addict, enabler, junkie, codependent. And these are words that are not helpful and should never be used to define a person. And we know that the current terminology is substance use disorder, even gotten rid of the word abuse, because many words can stigmatize, sometimes intentionally and sometimes not intentionally. So we've really embraced, a new path has embraced harm reduction, policies that reduce the harms associated with drug use and addiction. I tried tough love. As I said earlier, I tried everything people told me to try. But even that combination of words doesn't resonate with me. Tough love. It just doesn't resonate. Many people advised me to just let my son both hit bottom. But the more I realized, the more I learned, the more I realized that bottom for my son would mean death. You can't treat someone who's dead. So we all know what we're talking about with harm reduction now, but in the beginning it was hard to even say needle exchange because people looked at you like you were a major enabler. But now we really know that a lot of harm reduction strategies do work, like medication-assisted treatment, methadone, Suboxone, naloxone to reverse accidental overdose, safe injection sites, 911 Good Samaritan laws, and the list goes on. And now we're starting to adopt some of those policies. I believe that you must continue to be there to shepherd, as a friend of mine's term, your child into treatment again and again. I reject the word codependent. I reject the word enabler. But I do understand that there's a fine line between helping and hurting, so I'm up to debate on that. But I do know that there are no one-size-fits-all answers, and that everybody's story is to be valued, and the differences between their stories is to be valued. I'd like to talk about the failed war on drugs. Again, one of the great ironies of life. I became a mother the first time in 1971, and this is the same year, I think it was a few weeks later, that President Nixon declared the war on drugs. Little did I know then that these punitive prohibitionist policies would be destroying families like mine around the globe, actually, for the next 40 plus years. Our children are at the forefront of this war. 45 years since the war began, or Nixon's war. We've spent over $1 trillion. Drugs are cheaper, more potent, easier to obtain, and drug war violence is out of control. So we know the war on drugs has failed. 2.3 million people are in prison in the United States, a majority for drug-related crimes. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. Are we really 5 times more evil than citizens of other countries, or do we just need to change our priorities about who goes to prison? In 2009, I started with a couple of other people, a couple of other organizations, a national collaborative campaign called Moms United to End the War on Drugs, using that mom word, the power of the word mom. Moms throughout history have been those who protect and nurture our children and our families. Um, this was in order to broaden past reach and partners. People were reaching out and asking us if we could start a new path in their neck of the woods, and we're a very small nonprofit and really didn't have the capacity to be building chapters, although we do have a chapter in Florida and a chapter in Los Angeles. But going back to that collaboration issue, this was a way to bring in individuals across the nation and organizations who were already doing similar work. So mothers are taking a lead position to stop the violence, mass arrest and incarceration, and accidental overdose deaths that are caused by punitive prohibitionist policies. We're building a movement to stop the stigmatization and criminalization of people who use drugs or who are addicted to drugs. We now have built to representatives in 30 states, Mexico, Canada, the Philippines, and formal partnership with the United Kingdom. We created a Mom's Bill of Rights. Interesting that we should need a Bill of Rights, but we found that our rights as parents had been eroded because of the war on drugs. So we have 12 statements about our rights to nurture and protect. And we've created several national campaigns. The one you're looking at right now is the empty chair at the holiday table. It seems to work very well. People get a visceral response to it. People that are missing at the table because of incarceration, because of stigma, because of accidental overdose deaths, or because of drug war violence. And the Ask the Mom How to Save a Life campaign. This is both local and national. Tragically, 129 people, and this number may have grown since I last checked, are dying every day in the United States from accidental overdose. I know I'm telling you things that you all on this call already know, but naloxone is a safe, non-narcotic drug which quickly reverses an accidental opioid overdose. And since May 2014, PATH has conducted parent-to-parent and peer-to-peer overdose prevention training in naloxone distribution in San Diego County, and we know that we have 15 overdose reversals that have been reported. And many partners across the United States are now passing legislation similar to ours in California to increase access to naloxone and 911 Good Samaritan laws. That's the beauty of this campaign, is that one state can share with another what they're doing to pass these laws, and so we can be supportive of one another's efforts. The rise in accidental overdoses has been really increased sharply in the past few years due to prescription drugs and pain medications. And heroin is cheaper than Vicodin. I know that you know that this has become a major U.S. and global crisis, but finally we're getting attention on this issue, and it's amazing that it took so long, and it makes me angry that it took so long. In November, we launched the Ask Mom About the Casualties of the Drug War campaign with a video and social media, op-eds and press releases and such, and a rally in front of the White House that we again used for social media and to continue to spread the word. I don't think we've exhausted all the possibilities yet of this campaign. So here's what I know now. Addiction is a family disease that affects our entire society. I spoke out because I had to. I could not be silenced any longer. I'd learned about addiction, and I had to break through the shackles of shame. If my sons had any other disease, I would have learned about it. I would have done whatever I could to advocate for their best care. And unfortunately, the damage and stigma start so early. We begin in school by kicking out troubled teenagers, like picking out rotten fruit. We have a zero-tolerance policy for possession of illicit drugs. What has always killed me is if we kick out these kids out in order to protect the good kids, where are they supposed to go? I mean, in my son's case, it was the bad boys' school. wouldn't it be better to connect them immediately with healthcare professionals where their illnesses and issues can be addressed? And this is a campaign that we need to continue. Change what zero tolerance means. It should mean that we will not tolerate them not getting the help that they need. 56% of high school kids admit to having tried an illicit drug. So, like it or not, our children are experimenting with drugs, and many will walk away from it. About 1 in 10 will develop an addictive disorder, and my sons are those 1 in 10. Many of these kids, who are the 1 in 10, and many others, will end up in prison, unfortunately, unless we start being more open, honest, and non-judgmental. 1 in 3 families is dealing directly with addictive illness. These are the facts. Substance use disorders know no social, cultural, economic boundaries, and punitive incarceration does nothing towards rehabilitation. Treatment for substance use disorders is as effective as treatment for other chronic relapsing disorders. And I don't think we make that fact known enough. I absolutely believe that we must treasure and nurture hope. 23 million people are in recovery in the United States today, and they are, and you are a big part of it, Faces and Voices of Recovery, I love you for it, beginning to speak out and break through the anonymity. People from all backgrounds, all professions, all cultures. It's powerful. My own 2 sons are in recovery. My oldest son works as an alcohol and drug counselor and has 13 years in recovery. I want to share that he found his way through methadone maintenance. He was doing what a lot of people do, going to the methadone clinic in the morning in order to get well enough to go and score his heroin in the afternoon. But one day he decided to really give it a try and use only methadone as it was intended. And he found his recovery. He went back to school, graduated from college. And so while I had some bad feelings, some stigmatized feelings about methadone at the time, I learned, and he proved that to me. He's a survivor of both incarceration and accidental overdose. My younger son is celebrating 16 months recovery, and many thought that he wouldn't make it. And if those of you who have read my articles over the years in our newsletter, no, because I share about that. We weren't sure he was going to make it. His health had become so bad. But he has returned. He's rebuilding his life and relationships, and his health has returned as well. It's important that we never give up hope. And I wrote this poem years ago when I think I really was giving up hope. But I'm going to share it with you. It's very short. Hope is what I still have. It separates me from those who have lost it. Hope encourages me to continue to hold it and mold it, to prod it into continued existence. It is precious, yet exhausting, demanding that I don't deny or diminish it. Hope hollers at me to help others to find it, even when death or life steals it away. Hope is my burden and my salvation. So I have a vision where we handle substance use disorders as a public health problem. This is the basis for the movement building I do, and I know that I'm far from finished. Finally, legislators are speaking the same language, so we know that change is possible. I had the opportunity to speak with drug czar Botticelli last November. We spoke about harm reduction, and he's listening, and he's starting to speak the same language, and politicians are speaking our language. And the tide is definitely turning. I think we're at the tipping point. But we do still have a long way to go. I want to, this slide is here just to emphasize how important it is to collaborate with other partners in building a movement. It's important that we enhance the work that they are doing, that our partners are doing, rather than to try to recreate it if they're doing it well. And therefore, they will help you do the work that you're doing because that's what you do well. It's important that we all join together, shoulder to shoulder, in our common cause. That's what this campaign is all about. And the Moms United is a campaign, not a separate entity. It's meant to be an umbrella that supports and enhances the work of all of us with our common cause. This April, in partnership with Transform UK, we held a rally in front of the UN prior to the UN General Assembly special session on drugs. That's a mouthful. We called it UNGAS. We were able to mobilize mothers and family members from across the United States, Canada, UK, Philippines, Mexico, Belgium, Afghanistan, and Kenya, all to come to speak out to end the war on drugs, the global war on drugs. Over 200 people attended. We also worked with partners to enhance their work and on that day of action. And our partners included the Drug Policy Alliance, GRASP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. The Caravan from Mexico came and joined us, and Vocal New York. We were actually able to be in front of the, I should have included a slide on this, in front of the UN. You cannot get a permit to be in front of the UN, by the way, but we were able to speak for 10 minutes before we were sort of ushered along, but because we're moms, we were ushered politely by the police onto Dag Hammarskjöld Park, a block away, where we did have a permit and could continue our speeches. And so we feel like we were heard. We also were able to have a mom's session at the Museum of Drug Policy and a session inside the UN, a family session with all those partners speaking out. So I want to thank you for inviting me once again to share the campaign. Again, it feels pretty indulgent, self-indulgent to be sharing all my family story, but there's a tactic to this, again, to move people where they are forward by sharing something so personal. It's important that we continue to speak out, to throw off the shackles of shame, and to advocate for compassionate restorative policies. And although one voice can make a difference, several voices singing together can make a beautiful sound, and they can indeed make the world a better place. So I would love to hear from you. I'd love to start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. It's wonderful that you spoke, and this is a really wonderful presentation. For those of you with questions or anything you'd like to chime in, please use the Q&A box, which Emmanuel has just used, and put your questions in there, and then Gretchen will address them one by one. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, as the questions are coming in, I want you to know that I started this by the seat of my pants and a lot of passion. And I always tell people that because I had no idea about nonprofits, about movement building. I was afraid of public speaking way back then. So it was the cause, and it was that absolute feeling that this was a human rights issue that propelled this work forward. Is there any part of our campaigns that you want to know more about? Or how to get involved? Anybody want to be a Moms United partner? By the way, it's Mothers and Others. We just use that mom, that moral authority of the word mom to our advantage.
Right. Well, it seems pretty quiet here. Beyond that, Gretchen, was there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, it looks like Stacy just.
Okay.
I am not seeing the full thing, so I'm not sure what Stacy said.
Just click on it and it will open up. Stacy says, I lost my son to a heroin overdose 2 years ago. I'm in the process of starting a group in my small town. We've done a few things so far. But the biggest challenge is the not in our town mentality, or as a lot of people call it, the NIMBY, not in our backyard mentality. They mentioned needle exchange and they're crazy. So her ultimate question is, how exactly do you get through to people that yes, it's here and now, and I'm assuming that means the situation is here and now, and the issue of drug use is here in the community.
Stacey, I'm so sorry about your son, and we're hearing so many people. It's just it's a tragedy of such epic proportions, and I'm very sorry. And but a lot of our moms, Denise Cullen is on our steering committee of our Moms United to End the War on Drugs, and she has grasped grief recovery after substance passing, and she's started an organization called Broken No More because she wanted to be more than self-help or support, but to actually get more involved in action. So she's one of our partners. If you're not involved with her, I can share her information. But if you join us on our Moms United calls, I think you'll hear what a lot of people have done and how they've gotten involved. Sometimes people are just in too much pain, but I've found, and many of the mothers that I've talked to who have lost their children, that by acting, it helps you. It helps to ease your own pain, and I can hear that you're already trying to do that. So, getting involved with us, maybe we can help support one another in their issues. Certainly, there's always those people that say, I mean, it's as horrible as it is. Like I've had somebody to say to me when my son had survived a couple of overdoses, well, maybe you should have just let him go. Maybe, he didn't deserve to live. So people can be awfully darn cruel.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer, Gretchen. I've got another question coming in from Louise, who says, were there any mental health issues for any of your boys?
Here's an interesting thing about me. My sons were, I'm in my second marriage here, and he had 3 daughters, and I have the 2 sons who had addictive disorders. My husband's 3 daughters have mental illness, one bipolar, one borderline personality disorder, and my second husband, is a retired psychiatrist. In looking back, I had my son tested for ADD, my second son. It was sort of a borderline thing, and so he was never medicated. So it's never been really proven. Of course, my sons have had depression, but that fine line of when is it appropriate to be depressed because your life is in the toilet, right? Or because you're in jail, or because you've had so many things taken from you because of your disease. But no, the answer is that my 2 sons were never identified as with co-occurring disorders.
Thank you. And I have another question from Emmanuel, who says he has a question, comment, but he wants to wait for actual moms to comment. Thank you, Emmanuel. Super thoughtful. Go ahead and ask. Buddy Sanders says, how can one in another state get involved with Moms United? And that actually ties into Susan's question of, you mentioned having representatives in 30 states. Do you have anybody in New York State? And she's happy to share your URL with friends and advocates throughout the state. And
Absolutely.
Before Gretchen hops in New York, Face and Voices does have an organization that's in our network called Friends of Recovery New York, and that is an organization that any of you in New York should be checking out because they do wonderful work. Sorry, I'd turn it over to you again, Gretchen.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, we do have representatives in New York, a couple in New York City and some upstate, and we would love for you to get involved. And the only thing you have to do is, and I'll share my email here, is just reach out to me, and I'll include you on our loop. We have monthly phone conference calls, and we'll introduce you to those people that are in New York State as well as bring you into our conversation. So anybody on the call that would like to be a representative and join our monthly conference calls, which means you'll be involved in our campaigns. And by the way, one of the things I didn't mention was we also put out statements of like uh, we don't believe in the DARE program, so Moms United puts out a statement of why mothers would be against the DARE program and what we would like to see instead, things like that. So there's a lot of actions that we have going on a regular basis. So my email is GRET, like Gret, A New Path, ANEWPATH, at cox.net, and it's on the screen in front of you right there. So just reach out to me. I'd love to involve you.
Wonderful. And we've got one more question from Sylvia Gibbs, who says, I lost my son last August. He tried methadone, Suboxone, and was diagnosed as bipolar. Can you say what comes first, the mental problems or the substance use disorder? And I also lost him last August.
Oh, again, I'm so sorry. I hate hearing these stories, and I mean, thank you for sharing it. But I feel so badly because I have the sense that this didn't have to happen. We've got to put more money into research on this. And exactly your question, what does come first? And I, again, married to a psychiatrist, who's a doctor. There's still debate about that. So again, I'm not a physician, but I do believe that oftentimes young people get involved in self-medication because something is not quite right, and it's never been diagnosed and it's never been addressed as anything except for bad behavior instead of looking at what is the core issue. And that's why I say in high school, if somebody's acting out or carrying marijuana at school, maybe there's another issue behind it that needs to be addressed. And if we can just look at things with a compassionate scope rather than as this punitive and pushing them down. And here's another thing. I love the concept of just say no, KNOW, instead of just say no. We've been speaking at our kids instead of with our kids. And that needs to change. We need to have open and honest dialogue with our kids so that we can break through that generational divide, because they're not trusting us right now because we've been throwing scare tactics at them instead of honest communication. I know that was off topic of what you were saying, and I wish I had the answers for you, but hopefully with more research we can find that answer.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. I have a comment here from Emmanuel, and this I believe would be, I'm going to put it in the chat actually, because it might be better in there, and we get some, this is Emmanuel's comment in the chat. And to answer your question, Emmanuel, there are many programs coming. The issue with heroin maintenance programs in the U.S. is that it's very scattershot. And for so long it was dominated by methadone, which only in 2000 it was loosened on those restrictions, and some of the other alternatives for medication-assisted treatment options are just becoming widely available. And so that's part of the issue is getting those regulations in place to make it easily accessible for everybody. And then beyond that, it's getting enough doctors who are able to prescribe those medications has been part of the issue, and getting addiction training and beyond that, medication-assisted treatment prescriptions up to par as well. Chris Crossley says, I'm interested in learning more about why our stories matter so much in the recovery arena. Can you tell me more resources, books, websites surrounding this approach? Well, actually, Chris, facesandvoicesofrecovery.org, our website would be the place to find out more information on that and our resources. We have a resource called Our Stories Matter, which I will post in the web links here shortly. But basically, the reason that our stories matter so much, and this is not just from the person in recovery speaking, but it's also from the families, because it is something that we have to talk about in order to sort of break down not just the stigma, but really in order to show people that people can and do recover from their addiction and that they are not lesser for having suffered from an addiction. And much the way that someone who's suffering from an illness wants to speak out about it in order to draw awareness to it, if we continue to hide and not speak about our issues, then we won't be able to get the awareness and help and really ultimately financial leverage that we need in order to really help out with this pervasive and endemic situation. And the other part of it is if we don't speak, then who's going to control the narrative? So when you're looking at these narratives, is it going to be written by those who would condemn people who are suffering from substance use disorders as criminals and lowlifes, and it's they're abusing a drug by choice, it's a habit or something like that? Or are we going to take the language, or are we going to say, I'm a person in long-term recovery and I suffer from a substance use disorder, and this means that I have not used drugs or alcohol for a period of 3 years? Or are you going to let someone else say that, oh, you're an alcoholic and call you names like that? This is why it's important for us to choose to tell our stories and tell our family stories, because we tell our stories better than others can, and if we don't tell it, someone else will, and it might not be put into a positive light.
I wanna just say amen to that, Laszlo, because Faces and Voices is doing such wonderful work in that arena in terms of the language, and I think it's important as mothers and parents too, not to play the victim card, because I always hate it when somebody just pats me on the head, said like, oh, you poor parent. Well, no, I'm a strong woman who's going to change a lot of things in this world, and here's how I'm going to do it. When you're talking about controlling the narrative, media loves to do that to you. That, oh, you poor thing, this happened to you, rather than, wow, that you're doing wonderful things to change, to make change. So, yeah, control the narrative.
Exactly, and really, the big issue is, and Gretchen hit on this, is so much of the conversation at least gets perceived around the issues of addiction, which is really the narrative is much flashier, and it's important to talk about addiction issues, but it's also important to talk about the fact that there are solutions for many different people, and it comes in many different forms, and people can and do recover from their addictions. But if you were to look at the news, you would only notice that people are dying, for instance, of heroin overdoses at increased rates, which is true. But that also means there's many, many, many more people who are not dying, and they are finding active recovery from their addiction. And they are, contributing members to society, and it really helps to do away, and I hate, the word stigma is overused, but it really helps to do away with some of the stigma, but also to do away with how we are viewed, and it gives us our power back, because ultimately that's what it's about, is describing ourselves in positive light.
The other thing is that it's important that people from all walks of life, all cultures, all backgrounds speak out. For a while there,
Right.
We weren't getting the people from the professions speaking out because they were afraid they'd lose their job or, that type of thing. And that's changing too. And I think that's really important to bust through the stigma.
And one last question from Sylvia. She's going to put on a recovery walk in tribute to your son, but you worry about putting his business in the street. Sylvia, I think that, I'm sorry for your loss. I think that it's more important to speak up rather than worry about a perceived thing, because through speaking and bringing attention to the fact that your son passed away as a result of his substance use disorder, as a result of his addiction, that you may help some other parent struggling with the same issue, and you may help somebody else by drawing attention to it. It's a lot more powerful to speak about it. And in fact, there's a whole movement of parents who are choosing to use the obituaries as a place to speak about these illnesses. And There's a really great article that came out, I think, on CNN when Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto, died. And it said he died from the more acceptable illness, which was cancer. But in fact, Rob Ford struggled for many years with substance use issues, which did probably go very far in shortening his life. But no one talks about that. And no one talks about the fact that substance use issues cause shorter lifespans, and because it's something that's kind of rubbed and put underneath the carpet. And so it's important to speak out about these issues because it's not just something that happens in a vacuum. It affects families, it affects communities, and it also affects your health and your life over the long term. If you don't die from a heroin overdose, your alcohol use might cause a shorter lifespan. So with that, we're near the end of our hour, and I want to open it back up to Gretchen. Just have any last words, and we will close.
Well, thank you so much again, everybody, for being on this call and for showing interest in joining our movement. I know that many of you are already doing things, and I love that you're doing a walk. Join forces with other people so we can help support what you're doing. And again, reach out to me if you want to be a part of the Moms United movement, or if you have questions. April's on our call today, and April handles our naloxone trainings here in San Diego. And, again, with that, we felt like parents, moms, are oftentimes the first responder, and that we had every right to have it in our medicine cabinet. And so one day we'll get to where it is handled like any other chronic relapsing disorder. That wasn't much of a wrap-up, but I really appreciate all of you being on the call, and I appreciate what I'm seeing on the chat, and I love all the harm reduction strategies going on. Finally. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you all for attending. We will be posting this meeting, and keep an eye out for future endeavors from Facing Voices of Recovery. So thank you, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you.